I'm an evolutionary anthropologist. I am interested in how our bodies evolved and how our evolutionary past shapes our bodies and our health today. And, in the process of becoming a scientist and sort of developing my career, I have become absolutely focused on how our bodies burn calories. I have spent my career counting calories in species across the tree of life, from dolphins to dogs, and of course, humans and our close relatives, the other primates. And the reason I'm so excited about counting calories is that that is really where the rubber hits the road in terms of evolutionary biology. Life is a game of turning energy into kids. Calories are the currency of life. So all life processes, from growth to reproduction to maintaining our bodies and aging well, all of that comes down to how we bring calories in and burn calories off. All right, so I've been interested and focused on measuring energy expenditures in humans and other species for my whole career. Give you a sense of the kinds of things that our metabolism shapes that you sort of might not think about when you think about metabolism. Of course, we think about metabolism, usually it's about diet and exercise, but it's so much more than that. So for example, if we look at primates across the family tree of primates, compare ourselves to other mammals. So primates are humans, of course, apes, monkeys, lemurs, lorises. We see something really interesting. This is work that my lab developed about almost a decade ago now. Primates are a really slow metabolism group. We have slow burning engines. So ring-tailed lemurs compared to a swift fox, same body size, ring-tailed lemurs burn about half the number of calories. Bonobos, or ape relatives, compared to mule deer, about the same body size, again, about half the calories. Humans are the same thing. We burn about 2,500 calories a day, kilocalories, I should say. And that's about half as much as a eutherian mammal, placental mammal our size, would be predicted to burn. So we're a slow pace of life, slow metabolism species, and those things are linked together. The way our bodies burn calories dictates the pace of life, right? Metabolism is really at the core of what it means for any species to sort of be adapted to its environment. Okay, now we look a little closer to home within just our immediate family tree, humans and the other apes. We notice that there's another metabolic story here. And that is, if we compare the kilocalories burned, now just as an aside, when you look at your food labels, that kind of stuff, we often talk about calories, but they actually mean kilocalories. That's a small issue about units and how we talk about them, but we can talk about that later if we want. But so calories, kilocalories actually. If we look at how many kilocalories we burn every day, humans have evolved to burn far more calories than other apes do. We have a fast metabolic engine. We're still slow compared to other mammals, but within primates, and specifically within our immediate group, the other apes, we have a fast metabolism. And that fast metabolism, we're the high energy ape, that fast metabolism allows us to support all the really energetically costly traits that are so key to our species strategy. So humans are hunter-gatherers. We've been hunting and gathering for 2.5 million years. And all that energy that we burn supports that energetically costly lifestyle. Hunter-gatherers are more physically active than other apes. We have longer lifespans, which means we need to keep our bodies up, which takes energy. We have big babies more often. That takes energy. We have big brains. Your brain burns 300 kilocalories a day. That's the equivalent of running a 5K every day. So the human strategy is a really high energy cost strategy. And our metabolic evolution really sets the stage, makes us able, it has allowed the evolution of our human specific strategy. So metabolism is really at the center of what makes us human. But strangely, kind of curiously, and not to our benefit, it seems to be at the center of what makes us sick. So if we look at, for example, the global obesity epidemic, the growing number of people who are classified as overweight or obese, that's an issue of calories, right? It's bringing in more calories in than you burn off. So if we look at the distribution of people's BMIs in the 70s, this is in the US, compared to the 80s to 90s, compared to today, more and more of us are bringing more calories in than we burn off. We're gaining too much weight and we're becoming overweight and obese as a society. And your BMI is not the only important aspect of your health. Certainly, there's other aspects to focus on too, but it does increase your risk of other diseases. So we classify BMI into these categories. If we look at the risk of your disease risk, people in those different categories, for people who are overweight or obese, your likelihood of developing 2 or more of these really common diseases, diabetes, heart disease, or stroke, increases directly with being overweight. Your likelihood of dying from some different kinds of cancers increases with higher BMIs as well. And relevant to today, your likelihood of needing to go to the hospital with a COVID infection increases with higher BMI. So these are really fundamental health issues, global health issues today, and they all are exacerbated, certainly, and a lot of them are centered on our sort of mismatch between how many calories we're bringing in and how many calories we're burning off. This metabolic problem is at the center of not just what makes us human, but increasingly what makes us sick. To give you a sense as well, these diseases that are tied directly to how our body brings in calories, burns them off, and are directly related to obesity risk, are actually the leading killers globally, right? The leading causes of death globally, not just in the US and other rich countries, but globally, people are most likely to die from diseases that stem in part from metabolic problems. And even, again, these diseases outweigh the death toll from COVID even in the middle of an infectious disease pandemic. Okay, so metabolism is really critical to how our bodies work, how we evolved. It is also critical today to really important practical issues of how we keep ourselves healthy and prevent ourselves from getting sick. I've been studying metabolism, like I said, for my whole career, and a lot of my work has brought me to communities that don't seem to have these metabolic problems, that seem to be really healthy in terms of heart disease. They don't have diabetes, they don't have obesity, they don't have heart disease. And these are hunting and gathering and other small-scale subsistence societies. And so what I've been focused on the last few years is asking the question, what do hunter-gatherers and others with excellent metabolic health have to tell us about how our bodies really work and how our metabolism, how to keep our metabolisms healthy? And this work has brought me to some really fun and interesting places, both intellectually and geographically. And we've made a lot of interesting discoveries over the past few years doing this work. And I want to share those with you today. And I want to frame the talk around 7 metabolic myths that I think are hurting us as we try to do a better job keeping our bodies healthy, keeping ourselves free of metabolic disease and free of overweight and obesity. So there's what I've learned over the last few years of doing the work that I do, and as well as working with colleagues around the globe, is that the way we talk about metabolism in popular culture, it was really off track in a number of important ways. And so let's talk about and tackle these 7 metabolic myths so we can do a better job of understanding how our bodies burn calories, how our bodies work, and how to keep them healthy. All right, let's get started. So myth number 1, the idea that exercise can boost your metabolism. Now this sounds obvious, right? Surely if you exercise more, you burn more calories. So how could this be a metabolic myth? Well, it's interesting. This initially, my work in this area stemmed from a project I started with Dave Reichland and Brian Wood, measuring total daily energy expenditure with a Hadza community of hunter-gatherers in northern Tanzania. So as an evolutionary anthropologist, I was interested in how our bodies burn calories and how our bodies function in hunter-gatherer lifestyles. Those are the lifestyles in which we evolved. So we wanted to understand how metabolism works in these lifestyles. And the Hadza are one of the few places on the planet left that you can go and work with a living hunter-gatherer population today. The Hadza don't have any domesticated crops or domesticated animals, or no vehicles, no guns, no electricity, no plumbing. Instead, they live in the savanna of northern Tanzania in grass houses like this one. And every day they get up and they go and get wild food from the landscape around them. Women tend to gather plant foods in groups. So they go off together. They get a lot of activity, a lot of walking in to find and gather food. You get about 13,000 steps per day. If you're a step counter, you can compare your total to that. Sometimes the work of collecting food is relatively easy, like collecting berries, but often it's quite hard, right? Digging into really hard, rocky ground with digging sticks to get wild tubers. Men walk a lot as well. They actually walk a bit more than women to hunt for game. About 12 kilometers a day of walking. It's about 19,000 steps per day. That's on average, right? Sometimes it's much more. And if you're hanging out with a Hadza, like I've had a chance to do, you do a lot of walking. All right, so to put some numbers on it, they get about 2 hours a day of what we'd call moderate and vigorous physical activity. That's 5 to 10 times more than you and I do here in the US. So they get more activity in a day than you and I probably get in a week. And so we wanted to know how many more calories do they burn? Because they're so much more active. Surely they're burning a lot more calories than you and I do. But nobody had ever actually measured energy expenditure in a hunting and gathering group. So my friends and colleagues, Brian Wood and Dave Reichland and I, went out to do just that. And we used this gold standard technique called the doubly labeled water method, which actually measures how much carbon dioxide your body produces. You can't burn calories without making CO2. You can't make CO2 without burning calories. There's a really direct measurement of how many calories you burn every day. And the measurements go for about a week. And so it's a week-long look at how many calories a day on average your body is burning. This is a Hadza man drinking his doubly labeled water dose here. We do this kind of work all the time in the US and other industrialized countries in metabolic and nutrition studies, but it hadn't been used in a subsistence group like this. So what do we find? Well, we were really surprised. When we look at the daily energy expenditure, kilocalories a day, against fat-free mass, that's their lean mass, right? We see that bigger people burn more calories. Every dot here is a person. Open dots are women, closed dots are men, red are Hadza, gray are people from the US and Europe and other industrialized countries. Bigger people burn more calories, right? Those dots go up and to the right. There's a fair amount of variation person to person. But the Hadza do not look different than the other than folks in the US and Europe and other industrialized countries, right? There's no difference actually in energy expenditure per day between the Hadza and men and women in the US and Europe. Even though they're much more physically active, their daily energy expenditures are the same as you and me. Huge surprise. We wanted to know, is this just the Hadza or is this true in other populations? And it turns out it's true in other populations as well. This is work done by my former postdoc, Sam Erlacher. He's now a professor at Baylor. He was working with a population of hunter-gatherer and farmers called the Shuar in Ecuador in the Amazonian rainforest. He was looking at kids. The children among the Shuar population are much more physically active. He had accelerometry counts on them, and he was able to show they're much more physically active than kids in, for example, in Canada, in an industrialized country. And yet, their daily energy expenditure measured with doubly labeled water is the same, right? Every dot here is a kid. And you can see that bigger kids burn more calories, right? The more fat-free mass you have, the more you burn. But there's no difference here. There's no separation between the Shuar population and the US and UK populations you compare to. No difference in daily energy expenditure between the Shuar and industrialized populations of the US and Europe. Well, what about other populations? It turns out we see this across the board. This is work done with another foraging and farming community called the Chimani with my colleagues Mike Irvin and Hillary Kaplan. Culturally distinct from the Shuar, but ecologically in a similar kind of lifestyle. They're much more physically active. Here I have them alongside the Hadza as well, but look at all these industrialized countries they're with. And you can see that physical activity a day is much greater for Hadza, for Chimani and men and women. But daily energy expenditure, after we account for body size, is no different, right? And not only that, but look here. Look at these populations of industrialized folks from Japan to USA, more to less daily activity, but that doesn't correspond to variation in daily energy expenditure, okay? So the punchline here is there's just no relationship between the daily activity of a population and how many calories it burns each day. Physically active populations do not burn more energy than more sedentary populations, right? It's actually very hard to change your metabolism with physical activity. So what's happening here? Well, we can see, look at studies that have that enroll people in exercise programs and look at what happens to their daily energy expenditures to get a look at what's going on. This is a study where men and women were enrolled in a half marathon training study that they ran for 4 times a week. And the amount that they ran each session increased over the course of a year. And they measured daily energy expenditures using this isotope tracking technique, doubly labeled water. And here's the results for women. Men are basically the same. So when they were sedentary and then measured at about a couple months in, their daily energy expenditure, as we'd expect, went up, right, from all that training. Right now, they're a couple months into the training program, their daily energy expenditure goes up. Oh, well, okay, that makes sense. But now look what happens as their bodies adjust. When we look at 8 months in and then a year in, what we see is daily energy expenditure actually comes back towards baseline. And at the end of the year-long training program, these women are now able to run a half marathon. They were completely sedentary, didn't exercise at all here. Now they're running so often, 60 minutes a day, 4 days a week. And yet their daily energy expenditure is almost no different at all than it was at the beginning. And this suggests that daily energy expenditure is constrained, that our body adapts to exercise to try to keep energy expenditure within a pretty narrow range. If we increase our physical activity expenditures, we decrease other expenditures. That's why it's so hard to boost your metabolism with exercise, and why we don't see a relationship between activity levels and energy expenditure across populations. We can see the same thing in mice too. This is a nice study where the mice didn't have their wheel for the first week, and then they gave them access to their wheel and they ran and ran and ran more, but their daily energy expenditure in blue did not go up with how many wheel turns they were running per day. So it's not just humans. Our metabolism is dynamic. It adjusts to keep energy per day in check. Okay. This brings us to myth number 2. This idea that exercise is a great way to lose weight. We've actually known well before any of my work that exercise is not a great tool for losing weight. It actually is really hard to lose weight in any kind of durable way with exercise alone. If we look at studies that have tracked people and looked at their weight loss over several months, now some studies are very short, a lot of them are just very short, only a month or two. But if we look and compare them to studies that are longer and longer, up to 2 years long, we see that in short-term studies, results are all over the place. People lose a lot of weight, some people gain weight. But as we get out longer and longer, the amount of weight that you lose compared to what we'd expect you to lose approaches 0. Okay? So the amount of weight you can expect to lose after about a year of exercise is about 2 kilograms. Now, some people will lose more, some people will lose less, but that's not much. And the reason that you're not losing weight like you should on an exercise program or like you're promised is because, first of all, like we looked at before, your body adjusts and doesn't burn as many calories as you think. But also, if you burn more calories, your body responds by eating more calories, right? You burn more, you eat more. So this makes exercise a really important tool for health, as we'll say in a minute. I want to be clear about this. Exercise is still really good for you, but it's not a great tool for weight loss. Okay, so then does that mean that exercise isn't working if I don't lose weight? No, another myth about metabolism. Those adjustments your body makes make it hard to lose weight, but actually make it really good for you, make exercise really good for you. So look at 2 people here. The person on the right starts a new exercise program. The amount of energy per day he spends on activity goes up. And so for a while, he's burning more energy than he was before, or total energy. But after a while, his body cuts down on this other stuff. And that's what we see in our exercise study. That's what we see when we compare across populations. The bodies adjust. But that adjustment is key because it means you're spending less on things like inflammation and stress reactivity and reproductive hormone levels that are sky high in a lot of people. And that reduction is actually really healthy. So if we look at inflammation levels, people who are low exercisers, medium or high exercisers, lots of exercise per month, your inflammation levels go down, down, down. Reproductive hormones, people who are sedentary compared to men who have been running, distance running for several years, right? 1 or 2 or 5 or 10 or 15 years, testosterone levels actually come down a bit, and that's probably a healthier place to be. If we look at traditional societies like the Hadza, the normal testosterone levels for them are actually a bit lower. People who are too sedentary probably have testosterone and estrogen levels that are a bit too high. And how you react to stress? Well, this is a great study showing how stress is improved, stress reactivity is improved with exercise. Women who had mild depression either got talk therapy or talk therapy and jogging 5 days a week. And when they were in the jogging part of the study, their cortisol levels and their adrenaline levels went down by 30%. All right, so these metabolic adjustments to exercise, that's how you save energy, but it's also why exercise is so darn good for you, or at least a big part of the reason why it's so darn good for you. So exercise is still working, even if you don't lose weight, because of those adjustments that make it hard to lose weight also improve your health in important ways. All right. 4, well, does that mean that calories just don't matter, right? You hear this a lot. I don't even worry about calories. Calories are, people don't want to count them. They don't think it matters. Well, no, just because it doesn't work out in a sort of simple way, our metabolism, doesn't mean that the calories aren't important, okay? Calories, in fact, are what's all that really matters in terms of how your body is taking in energy and burning it off. This is my son in front of the first ever piece of equipment designed to burn calories. Designed to measure calories in Antoine Lavoisier's lab, which has been now moved to the Musée des Arts et Métiers in Paris. This canister here was built to put a guinea pig in. Excuse me. Antoine Lavoisier put a guinea pig in there. He packed the outside of this is a double-walled container, packed the outer wall with snow and ice, watched how much heat was produced by how much water was released, measured how much CO2 came off the top, and he was able to demonstrate that metabolism is just simply combustion, which is to say that our bodies follow the laws of physics. So calories, of course, they matter. All the weight that you have, everything, in fact, that you have in your body, all your tissues, are food that you ate. And if you're carrying extra fat, those fat calories are calories that you ate. And when you burn them off, they'll be gone. And so calories really are all that matters. The issue is that we do a bad job keeping track of them, right? So it isn't that calories don't matter, it's that we do a really bad job keeping track. For example, how many calories do you think that you burn? Well, how many calories do you think that you eat? You probably have a hard time keeping track. If we ask men and women to keep track of their calories and measure and compare that to how many calories you know they're burning, people underreport by about 30% a day. You underreport the calories you eat by about 30% per day. It's really hard to keep track of the calories we eat. And not only that, but you have probably been told, and may well believe, that you burn 2,000 calories a day. That's what we're typically told. And that's become the dogma. But in fact, if you measure the calories burned per day, in women, it's about 2,400 calories a day, or in men, it's about 3,000 calories a day. It's well different, right, than 2,000 calories a day. So calories count. We just do a bad job counting them. All right. And in fact, if we try to lose weight, the calories are all that matters. The kinds of calories don't matter a whole lot for how we lose weight. You can assign people meat-based diets, right, Atkins or sort of low-carb diets. You can assign them plant-based diets, vegetarian and vegan diets that are heavy on plants. And they've done that in several studies now. This is one that I like a lot. You look at weight loss at 1 year, right, from meat-heavy to plant-heavy diets and some mixed in between. And people across all these diets they didn't do great losing weight on any diets, but they did about equally well on all of them. And the only thing that mattered wasn't which diet you were on, but how well you stuck to it. So all diets work if you stick to them. They all work the same way, by cutting calories. So calories are really at the center of our metabolic health, even if we do a bad job keeping track of them. All right, well, so where do those calories come from? This is metabolic myth 5. This idea that humans evolved to eat a meat-heavy paleo diet, right? I can tell you from working with hunter-gatherers, they spend a lot of time and energy, like these women here, digging up and collecting carb-heavy foods, all right? Tubers and baobab fruits, honey. Honey is 15% of the diet among the Hadza and an important part of the diet and a lot of other hunter-gatherers too. Hunter-gatherer diets are often quite high in carbs. They're also high in fiber. That's an important thing to remember. This idea that hunter-gatherer diets are low carb or that paleo diets are low carb just doesn't wash with the data. In fact, meat in hunter-gatherer societies is often scarce and it's always lean, right? Wild animals carry about half the amount of fat and half the amount of saturated fat as the meats that you can buy at the butcher's or at your supermarket. All right, and again, honey is a big part of the diet. This is a Hadza man. They climb up into these trees, they pound pegs into the side of these big silvery baobab trees and climb up to get honey often out of the hollow limbs of baobab trees. They work really hard to get that honey, and it makes up a big part of the diet. So there is no evidence really for low carb hunter-gatherer diets. Perhaps in the Arctic, some Arctic populations, they have low amounts of plants up there, and so they eat high amounts of meat. But in most hunter-gatherer diets like the Hadza, you have a lot of carbs. It's also, by the way, a really diverse diet. So here's over the course of a year, all the different contributions of foods to the diet, right? Sometimes you eat a lot of meat, sometimes you eat hardly any meat. Sometimes you eat a lot of honey, sometimes you don't, right? But it's always a mix, and it's never just one thing. So if anybody ever tells you that the diet, the ancestral diets were just one way or just one thing, or that they were particularly meat heavy, they're off the mark. That's within the Hadza. If we look across populations, again, we see a huge range of diets in terms of how many calories they're getting from animals. If you go up towards the Arctic, of course, away from the equator, you eat more animals, sure. But for most of us, and for most of our history, hunter-gatherers have been eating a big mix of plants and animals. And so I have to laugh, if we look at Hadza or Chimani or Shuar, these are populations I've talked to you about already. We look at how many carbs versus fats versus proteins in their diets. They're all really carb heavy. The US diets are actually kind of fat heavy in comparison. But none of these look like what we're often told are paleo diets. These are two popular paleo diets that are out there in literature. There's a bunch of others as well, but none of them actually look like what real hunter-gatherers eat. Okay, moving right along, we're almost done now. Last couple here. How about this one? You might have heard this before. You might even believe it yourself. A slow metabolism dooms you to obesity. Well, that actually isn't true either. Here's daily energy expenditure again against fat-free mass in a bunch of men and women from my lab. These are measurements from my lab here at Duke. And as you can see, bigger people burn more calories, but there is some variation. Some people burn more calories than we'd expect for their size. Some people burn less. And so we can think about the people who burn more calories than we'd expect for their size as being fast, and those who burn less as being slow metabolism. But it turns out that if we look at weight change compared to if you have a fast or slow metabolism, right? So we measure you today, and we also measure you again in a few weeks or a few months. The amount of weight that you gain in that time doesn't correspond at all to if you have a fast or slow metabolism. It just doesn't predict your weight gain. Right? Burning more calories doesn't mean you'll be slim, and burning fewer doesn't mean you're doomed to be obese, right? BMI doesn't tell us whether you have a fast or slow metabolism. High and low BMI people all cluster equally around that line between how big you are and how many calories you burn. Being slim doesn't mean you're going to burn more calories. Okay. Metabolism doesn't determine your weight. Metabolism responds to your weight, right? Your genes have a lot more to say about how much you might struggle with weight. And we've found now hundreds, this isn't work that I do, I'm not a geneticist, but people who do this sort of work have found hundreds of genes that seem to be associated with your likelihood of struggling with weight, of having a higher BMI. And interestingly, all of these genes found so far are active in your brain. Well, that makes sense because that's where the system is that controls how much we eat, how full we feel, and how much we're rewarded when we eat high-calorie foods. All right, so this brings us to the last one I'll talk about, which is this idea that obesity is a sign of personal failure, right? And this is an idea that's been around since at least the 1400s, right? The 7 deadly sins, sloth and gluttony here, that people have thought, well, if you're overweight, then that's your fault. Well, no, that's not really the case. Obesity is a function of our food environment, right? We are surrounded by foods that are cheap and high energy density, and it is food that our brains were never evolved to eat. And all those genes that are active in our brains that control how much energy we bring in, how much energy we burn off, right? Those systems are old evolved systems, and it's very hard for some of us to regulate our food intake appropriately. It happens at an unconscious level, how many calories you're eating and how many calories you're burning off. Your brain regulates that, and our food environments don't work well with the way that a lot of us are wired. We know that if we eat ultra-processed foods, right? This is a great study to show this. You feed people ultra-processed foods or unprocessed whole foods. Now, importantly, the amounts of carbs, fats, proteins, and fibers are the same in both sets of diets. And the same people get the same diets, right? So some people either start with ultra-processed and then move to unprocessed, or start unprocessed and move to ultra-processed. And these are studies done where the person lives on site for the whole 2 months of the study. And we track what they eat and how much weight they gain. The work done by Kevin Hall, not by my group. This is done at the NIH by Kevin Hall's group. And look what happens. When they're on the ultra-processed food diet, they gain weight. When they're on the unprocessed food diet, they lose weight. And not because of the carbs and fats, because those are held the same. It's because all this processing makes our food, I think, harder to resist and easier to overconsume. Okay. And ultra-processed foods have been getting more and more common in our diet. This is Canada from the 1930s till today. The percentage of their diet that comes from ultra-processed foods, 55% these days. The UK and the US are no different. And this is actually a growing problem in middle income and poorer countries as well. So this is a global issue, and it's getting to be a bigger and bigger global issue year by year. So obesity isn't a sign of personal failure. We're surrounded by a food environment that makes it very hard for our brains to regulate how much we eat and how much we burn. It doesn't mean that you don't have any, you can still help yourself by keeping your personal food environment, the food that you buy at the store and bring home. You can keep that food environment healthy by avoiding ultra-processed foods. So we do have tools to help us manage all this and stay at a healthier weight. But when we think about the societal issue of obesity, it's not a personal failure issue. It's the way that we built our food environments. We need to address that as a society if we want to avoid metabolic disease and obesity. Okay, so just to wrap up then, a couple punchlines to take home. Your metabolism, I hope I've convinced you, is not only important and sort of central to how we live our lives, but it's also clever and dynamic. It's a product of our evolution. We aren't simple machines that we can rev our engines faster or take our foot off the gas, right? We're not simple car engines. Our metabolic engines are much more clever and dynamic than that. To watch your weight, watch your diet, but that doesn't mean exercise isn't important. Exercise is critically important too, and if you want to stay healthy, you need to stay active every day throughout the day. So we need to think about diet and exercise as two different tools for two different jobs. Diet for your weight and exercise for everything else. I know I moved really quickly through all that. I'm looking forward to talking with you guys and answering questions. You can also read a lot about this in the book I just had out called Burn, which covers a lot of this material. And if you're interested in learning more about the Hadza and our work with them and how we try to help them out and keep them a strong and vibrant community, please check out the HadzaFund.org, and you can learn more about the Hadza there. Thank you.